in the vessel, might a transformation take place? There's a play of opposites between above and below, inner and outer. But is there a causal relationship implied? Does the response to one situation perhaps synchronistically lead to another? I don't know. But I continue to contemplate these relationships. What I can say is that at certain times I can relate to one painting or another. I'm also reminded of the fallacy of believing that just because one thing follows another doesn't mean that progress is being made, or that there is a narrative to discover, and hence this eternal round of the planets reminds us of that. These are the final 4 paintings of the Splendor Solis. The visual complexity of the previous paintings falls away in the final 4 paintings. To me, they present a distillation that conveys a different quality of consciousness, of being, than is found in the previous images. It is something only clearly known when one has passed through the earlier states. Okay, I'm going to stop the slides for right now. Oh, good. Can you see me now and hear me? Okay, I was having trouble getting back to the meeting.
I can.
Okay. I'm not speaking here of insight or intellect. The paintings clearly show that the process is a felt experience, and they do it through color, facial expression, body language, and through symbols. I wonder, what might they be trying to tell us? Could it be that, from the alchemist's point of view, so-called higher consciousness is not a state without emotion, but it can be attained only by not acting out of emotion, yet experiencing it fully and unflinchingly, despite the suffering that one must endure. We might say, we just skip that for a moment. This is contrasted to the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice, where enlightenment ends suffering and results in a sublime equanimity. The alchemist's journey brings to mind T.S. Eliot's words, "For liberation, not less of love, but expanding, of love beyond desire, and so liberation from the future as well as the past. Thus, love of a country begins as attachment to our own field of action and comes to find that action of little importance, though never indifferent. History may be servitude, history may be freedom. See, now they vanish, the faces and places, with the self which, as it could, loved them, to become renewed, transfigured in another pattern." Now, let's look at the symbolism of the first few paintings. You all with me? Okay. The very first painting depicts the coat of the arms of the art of alchemy, a disintegrating coat of arms that seems to fall into an alternate dimension. Henderson felt that this series was like the analysis of personal complexes, where you never know what is going to happen next. So now we're going to go back to the slideshow. Okay. We see here a central scene surrounded by a frame of plants and animals. Such a frame is typical of illuminated manuscripts of the time. But the frames themselves in this manuscript may also suggest a different reality or consciousness in the natural world. Here we see animals acting in more human ways, playing an instrument and offering food to another species. What might this imply? That we are not so different? Or is this symbolic of an aspect of an alchemical transformation, where one substance symbolically feeds another? The making of music reminds us of the importance for alchemists of performing operations in harmony with the astrological situation, as well as their belief that the movement of the planets created sounds, which they refer to as the harmony of the spheres. The title, The Arms of the Artists, sets out the problem. We see a coat of arms, something originally granted by a ruler in recognition of the bravery of a knight. It was then passed down from father to son. But the coat of arms of alchemy is shown in multiple dimensions and is coming apart. It shows a state of deconstruction that doesn't hold together. What might that mean? The paradox is obvious. The old order is coming apart. We also see two men in conversation with turbulent waters in the canal. Perhaps they are asking, how might this problem be solved? Let's look at the problem more closely. We see that here is a sun within which there are three faces that look disturbed. What could be a better representation of a very disturbed and fragmented consciousness? The steady sun, which does not appear to be falling off the banner, gives us a very different feeling. The knight's armor includes a golden crown that is surmounted by three crescent moons. And those look black, and that's because the silver is tarnished. They used real silver in the painting. The golden crown, a symbol of wholeness and higher consciousness, or the ruling principle, here refers to the royal art of alchemy. The three crescent moons are entirely out of place in a heraldic manner, not to mention in their location above the golden crown. They refer, of course, to the feminine in Western culture. Why three moons? This traditionally refers to the goddess or the triune goddesses, or to the three stages of womanhood. You'll recall from Jung's discussion of the axiom of Maria in Psychology of the Transference that the number 3 in Pythagorean number theory is a masculine number. So here our expectations are challenged because it is associated with the feminine. And they hold a place above the golden crown, not inferior to it. Might this new crown represent a consciousness that integrates both masculine and feminine in its awareness? And so I see this as possibly a hint at the solution to this problem, as the patriarchal knightly knighthood, chivalrous even way of doing things is no longer working. So we're shown both the problem in the image of the lower sun and possibly the solution, but not so fast. It's easier said than done. Let's go on to the next painting. The answer shown in subsequent paintings. It will be necessary to leave the accepted structures of life and attempt to discover the fundamentals of the natural world to which humans belong. The banner reads, "We seek the nature of the 4 elements." The alchemist is setting off on a journey that symbolically is represented by his actually going into nature and carrying an alembic and pointing to that place in the alembic where there begins to be a vapor hitting the side of the alembic. So seeking the nature of the 4 elements, the 4 elements of the Greeks, is something much deeper than simply going out into nature to rediscover nature by going to the beach or something like that. This is a much more profound and serious, and you notice, very focused thing. This is done with great intention. The church suppressed pagan religions which were connected to nature and an experience of the sacred in the natural world. The church also devalued women and suppressed goddess worship, a practice that desacralized feminine qualities of relatedness, nurturing, a connection to a particular place on the earth, and qualities of tenderness, relatedness, compassion, and the valuing of plants, animals, and natural forces as sources of knowledge and wisdom. These links were entirely severed for Americans who were immigrants and had no culturally unconscious connections to place. This made it easy to identify as a conqueror and exploiter, much as the ancient Greeks did when they conquered other lands. Referring again to the contemporary Iranian philosopher Syed Hossein Nasr, he wrote, "The translation of Arabic works into Latin, which caused a major intellectual change from the 11th to the 13th centuries, resulted gradually in the Aristotelianization of Christian theology based on illumination, and the contemplative view of nature was increasingly pushed aside as the Gnostic and metaphysical dimension of Christianity became ever more stifled in an increasingly rationalistic environment." Also, I'm reminded here of Richard Tarnas as saying that, when Constantine converted to Christianity, the Romans became Christian, but maybe more importantly, the church became Roman. I want to point out here that if you look at this frame now, you see that the 2 deer are looking up at the painting of the alchemist, as if nature, something in nature itself, is aware now of this return to discover what nature's really about, the fundamentals. And here's the close-up. So here's our third painting. The self-discipline and ability to make discriminations, symbolized by the knight with his sword and focused stance, is not to be discarded. However, these developments, we would say ego developments, are now in the service of making a distinction between two opposites or complements, sulfur associated with the masculine principle and Mercury associated with the feminine. The two fountains flow over and into a natural setting. Here their potential is lost. They return to nature. Across the knight's breast, we see the famous color sequence of alchemy: black, white, yellow, red. The art of alchemy is required to bring the skill to these two substances in order to create mercuric sulfide or cinnabar. And these colors are observed during that process. We see also the 7 gold and silver stars above his head, which are the 7 planets and also the number of initiation. According to the text of the Splendor Solis, art goes quite another way to work and with different intention from nature. Therefore, does art also use different tools and instruments? But it then goes on to say something that was a complete anathema to the Catholic Church. The form of everything, be it living, growing, or metallic, comes into existence by virtue of the interior force in matter, except the human soul. And of course, the Church argued that God created everything and that nothing could be, nature could not create nature in some way of itself. The inscription on this is quite interesting and full of paradoxes. And even translating from the Latin, I found when I was translating it that there are things in the Latin that could be read 2 ways. But here's my best translation. From 2 waters make one, whereupon seek to make the sun and moon, and prepare to drink the wine of the antagonists, and you shall see with the dead. Thereupon make watery earth and multiply the stone. Here are the alchemical colors that you find used symbolically throughout alchemy. So let's go on to the 4th painting, which we're going to look at in some detail. Okay. This is the well-known alchemical theme of the king and the queen, but I know of no other image of the queen and king like this one. Here, the queen looks serene while the king is anxious. It seems to me that this portrays the situation where the feminine has reclaimed her natural strength. This is disconcerting for the king, to say the least. But note that she is not trying to dominate him. She is not using power. Rather, her gesture is calm, unthreatening. There is an inscription above and below this picture, and the upper inscription says the particular, and the lower one says the universal way with the particular included. And I think this, even though this is a cultural lecture, I must say I can't think of anything that describes individuation better. That there's a paradox that when one becomes more one's idiosyncratic self, you also feel more connected with all of creation, rather than feeling isolated. So, continuing with this image, we see that the king and queen are meeting in a natural setting outside the court with its many rituals and prescriptions for behavior, outside of their carefully scripted roles. The queen is standing on an orb, while the king is standing on a fire. The orb may be the earth or perhaps the moon, as it is in the Rosarian image. And just to compare it with the Rosarian image, you see that on the right. The ideal of royalty can represent the archetypal ruler who is at the top of the hierarchy in a society, the final arbiter of disputes, and the crown is a symbol of his kingship. The queen can refer to the feminine principle of relatedness, while the king refers to the masculine principle of logos. Both of these live within the psyches of both men and women, and even modern Americans have dreams in which a king or queen appear. Illustrations, if we think about it, usually depict the queen and king on their thrones at banquets and processions, holding forth at court with their attendants. They are not important primarily as individuals, but for what they represent. However, as I pointed out, the king and queen can no longer rely on this as they meet out in nature. Here we might think about what it is like when a culture meets an opposite culture or a culture with different values, and they're not surrounded by their usual trappings. Might it be a different kind of meeting? We see here too something very impressive that is so different from the other images of the king and queen with which I'm familiar, which are mainly the woodblock prints, because you see how beautifully the affect is portrayed in gesture and in facial expression. Here's a close-up so you can see that a little more clearly. And you see, even the sun and the moon have their own expressions. The moon seems to be looking down at the king, while the sun seems to be looking over at the moon. And here's something quite interesting, which is here, the moon is shining by her own light. She's not a reflection of the sun. Now I want to show you an interesting coincidence. You saw in an earlier slide that the king is standing on a fire that looks as if it might have eyes. Here's what the king and queen are standing on. And I happen to be preparing for something else and looking at the vision seminars. And I saw this painting in the vision seminars. And on the painting was written this text: I beheld a face closed, and I besought the face, oh, open your eyes unto me so that I may behold them. And the face became very dark, and slowly the eyes opened. I beheld what no man is meant to see, so full of woe and beauty that I cried out. I could bear it no longer, and the eyes closed. I don't know what this was meant to be, but it does look almost like some wild and fiery and primitive creature there at the feet of the king, that he's in all of his kingly power. He's trying to, I don't know, maybe he's either stepping on it or trying to suppress it, maybe. We could project a lot of things onto this. I wanted to tell you that, like, when we think the background of the European alchemy, it's, of course, came from Islamic alchemy, which was much more sophisticated in many ways than European alchemy, because their civilization had been thriving. And it wasn't the same fundamentalist kind of Islamic beliefs that we hear about today. In medieval Islamic culture, the alchemist's relationship to the feminine was not only a kind of archetypal relationship, but it was also manifested in real collaboration and exchanges between men and women. And this goes all the way back in time. And this is actually portraying Zosimos, who was in the 3rd century. And but these are illustrations now of Zosimos and his talking and standing next to an oven with Theosebia. This illustration is one of my very favorites. It's from the 1400s, and it's an illustration of a very famous, much earlier poem by the great poet Nizami. And in this, some alchemists are having a dispute, and they go to settle to see a woman alchemist who's sitting up in her window. Her name is Miriam, and they are going to ask her to help them to settle their dispute. So she's clearly a figure of wisdom and reverence. And we see in her courtyard, there's a tree, and at the base of the tree, there are flowers, so that it is blooming near the earth. Now, in this, just to add a little humor and show you that the alchemists had a great sense of humor, some of them, the little streamers that the king and queen are carrying, hers says milk of the virgin, and they're in Latin, and his is coagulate the masculine. Now, these are related to famous alchemical sayings, solve, dissolve, and coagulate, dissolve and coagulate. And, but I want to show you the illustrations. The milk of the virgin was like a white substance, a white liquid, and it could be different ones. But here are some illustrations. So here's one of virgin's milk with the 2 alchemists nursing at her breast while she's crowned, and her face and hair are extremely red. And here's another one, quite different, of virgin's milk. She's got a lot of milk to give there. And in fact, it's flooding along with the beast that she's sitting on. You've got to wonder about a little ambivalence there. So the king and queen here are on a base now. We're now moving into 3 dimensions. And this base is very important. It shows the cultural background against which the king and queen are meeting. And this base is a critique of Greek heroic ideals. The picture on the left shows, and it's thoughtfully labeled for us by its creator. It's the famous battle between Hector and Achilles at the Siege of Troy. Now, you may be familiar with the story. Achilles was the son of a sea nymph, Thetis. And Thetis wanted to protect him from mortal danger. And so she held him by his ankles and did something so that he would be, his whole body would be bathed, but she was holding him by his ankles. And so it turned out that he could only be killed by a wound to his ankle. And he was a most celebrated warrior of the Greeks. He was brave, but he was arrogant and spoiled and impetuous and lusty, and traded women around, which they all did. And he was upset. He got upset because somebody that he'd taken as a spoil, somebody else claimed him, and he had to take him back from his friend, this woman back from his friend he'd given him to. And he was really mad about the whole business. Like, it just irked him. And so he left the field of battle. He was and sulked off and took all of his great warriors with him. And in the meantime, the Greeks started having a lot of trouble in the battle and doing badly. So somebody went and they begged him to come back. Please come back and help us. Things are falling apart up there. And he was still so sulky about this whole thing that he sent his very dear, dear friend, Patroclus. And he said, wear my armor and lead my men into battle. I just can't go back yet. So Patroclus goes, and he ends up being killed. And Hector, the great Trojan warrior, was the one who actually didn't fell him, but took the final blow. So Achilles, enraged, is going to go back and kill Hector. Now, his mother warns him not to do it, that it will lead to his death. But he doesn't pay attention to that. He's full of passion. And he goes, and indeed he kills Hector. And he drags Hector's body back and forth to disgrace his body and to humiliate people. And this was really against their idea of what was honorable. And of course, Achilles then ended up being killed. And he asked that his bones be mixed with those of Patroclus, which they were. And the place where they were buried was later visited by Alexander the Great. So here we have this warrior hero, this ideal. The large center part of the frieze shows the story of Alexander the Great and the basilisk. Oh, hold, Yoshi, it's okay. That's my dog. It's okay. And so Alexander is shown across from a city. And in this story, this shows a kind of middle way of the Greeks, because what happens is that his men and horses inexplicably start dropping dead, and they can't figure out what's going on. And then someone sees a basilisk sitting across the river on the wall of the city that they are presumably hoping to conquer. And someone says, oh, it's a basilisk. You can't look at that or you'll be killed. It kills with its gaze. And so instead of rushing impetuously to kill that basilisk, they have a discussion about what to do. And they come up with the idea of using mirrors so that the basilisk will be killed by its own gaze. So here we have Alexander, who's still very much in this Greek heroic conquering mode. But he also pays attention to philosophy and solves problems, and of course brings learning, doesn't just take the spoils, but brings so-called Greek civilization or Greek civilization and really the classics to other parts of the world. Here's a close-up of the basilisk on the wall. And on the right is a picture by Dürer of a basilisk. So you could see that resemblance a little more easily and clearly. This monstrous figure. Now, the third one is Alexander again. And this is a picture of the famous meeting of Alexander and the philosopher, the Stoic, Diogenes. And Diogenes, this took place at the Scythian Games, and Diogenes went there and was staying in a barrel. And Alexander heard that he was there, and he came to greet Diogenes and offered him a boon, which Alexander liked to do. So he offered Diogenes a boon, said, here I am, Alexander, what can I do for you? And Diogenes said, you're standing in the way of the sun, would you please move? And that was the boon he wanted. Now, and then Alexander said, if I were not Alexander, I would be Diogenes. Now here, I can't imagine a meeting of two more opposite people. And here they are. And here we have the kind of idea of the shadow in Jungian terms, the opposite. And if you weren't one thing, you might be the opposite. So that's very interesting. So here is a different kind of meeting of the opposites taking place at the base of this image of the king and queen. Now, an interesting thing about Diogenes is that he was a worshiper of Sibyl. The Greeks called her Mountain Mother. She was the goddess of the earth's fertility, of caverns and mountains, nature and wild animals. And so here we have this Stoic who's also a worshiper of the great mother goddess. Okay. Dana, how are we doing on time?
I think that if we have a moment at the end, I might suggest that we break out of your show and get some conversation going among the panelists and yourself. And
I think, yeah, this has taken a little longer than I imagined. I think I spoke more slowly. Let me end this.
Let me go up here. Here we go.
Okay.
All right, we're back.
Yeah. Let me just, if you don't mind, I just will say something from at the end, if I might. Yeah. Just as the rest of what I wanted to present continues to show images of that develop more and more about the relationship between the opposites, and in particular about the relationship to the natural world and a redemption of the feminine principle. And just to what I would add to this is that Marie-Louise von Franz, in her very last lecture, wrote that she thought Jung's most important contribution was the redemption of the feminine principle of relatedness. So I'll leave you there just to bring us back to Jung. And thank you for your patience.
Oh, thank you so much, Dyane. I'm treasured not only by your knowledge of the manuscript, but your passion for it. And so that we have the opportunity, I would love to hear from David, Gus, Dennis, Boris, Gus, everybody. I'd love to open it up, and what are your thoughts about the universal and the particular? I mean, it's such a resonant theme with the Tao and everything with Jung. Go for it.
I'll say I see David's unmuted, and that's normally our easiest way to kind of subtly buzz ourselves in.
Gus raised his hand. Oh, and he's unmuted. So go ahead, Gus.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Dyane. I'm always astounded by these plates. So used to looking at the rosarium and woodcuts, the astounding beauty and articulation of these plates is always amazing. I was glad you put that rosarium, kind of the king and the queen in there. That's my series. Sleep with those plates under my pillow every night so that they come up and impact me. One of the things that in my work to expand what you're talking about in the masculine and the feminine, really, and culturally thinking about the solar qualities really being stability, permanence, unchangeability, being challenged by the lunar qualities in terms of the unstable, disorder, ever-changing, impermanence. I think kind of one of the things about the popularity of Buddhism now is that idea of the impermanence. And kind of struck by your opening comments of really, about the redemption of the feminine. We're talking about the 1500s, and look at how much have we progressed actually since the 1500s of trying to raise this, I would say, lunar principle. I think the solar quality kind of is just fighting back, wanting to keep things the way it is and unchanging. And we're really sort of changing, facing a changing world and a different world kind of, around that. So I think that kind of, adds another layer, of kind of general layer to the particular that you're also focusing on. I was kind of wondering, kind of, Anne being a woman, what is the tenacity of, why this is an ever ongoing process of trying to lift the lunar qualities and the feminine into consciousness?
I think that we have to be really careful not to mix up, though, or to conflate, Gus, and I'm sure you wouldn't, solar consciousness with patriarchal consciousness.
Yeah, and you think it's really the power that fuels more the patriarchy of the not wanting to let go of this kind of ordered system. Thank you.
If I may, I might mention that I think there's a difference between the sun and the sun at noon, right? The sun that doesn't want to fall, the sun at the top, at the apex, resisting any descent. So I think that when we talk about the sun and moon, the meaning varies based on the station.
I'm kind of surprised if you're talking about male and female, especially alchemical playfulness about the ambiguity, why not look at the images of hermaphrodites that are prevalent through, it's at its simplest chemical formula, it's mercury amalgam gilding that, Aphrodite is copper and Hermes is mercury. And in fact, the 7 planets are 7 metals. That's why you also get 7 stars that are gold and silver. Couple of things. I loved your talk. Thank you very much, Dyane. And I guess, as you know, I did an Art of Alchemy exhibition at the Getty, and then Jörg Vollnagel and I reiterated it in Berlin with a lot more objects, because there are a lot more objects in Berlin. One thing, I mean, so maybe in the time of Bacon, the 13th century, there's Magnus, the church bans alchemy for a little while because the debate is alchemy the art that replicates nature, or does alchemy perfect nature? And the idea that God doesn't let nature be generative, I totally disagree with, because the whole idea is that he has imbued all matter with animation. All matter has soul, and that's the whole idea, both in natural philosophy, that it's transformation of the self towards perfection, rubedo, and transformation of matter. The thing for alchemists is that it takes nature 1 million years for mercury and sulfur to combine into vermilion. But in Alchemy 101, so the first thing you teach your students is you can make artificial cinnabar in a couple of hours. Also, I guess I was saying maybe the church for a while, there are periods where alchemy is banned, but I mean, Lorenzo de' Medici becomes Pope Leo X, is a huge supporter of alchemy, and Hermetica. And I don't want to go on too long. There's just one thing that I always think of in one of the images you showed in the border, where you show it's a simian, it's an ape, and then an ibis that he's feeding.
Yeah.
And then you have an ape playing music. And El Jahiz in the 19th century, an African Islamic natural philosopher, which is what I think alchemists consider themselves. It was a mainstream science. El Jahiz in Kitab al-Hayawan, the Book of Living Beings, basically proposes a theory of evolution, that the creature that is more of its species, that's more intelligent and adaptable to its environment, will evolve, will become more sensible, will become more intellectual. And in Islam, the stages are from ape to human to prophet to angel. You can't become God, but you can be sublimated into God. And you show this image that the Splendor Solis shows this image that has an ape feeding an ibis, which is the Egyptian god Thoth, god of the scribes, god of
alchemy,
written record. And then after that, the ape is playing guitar. You know, it's learned music, it's learned art, which I think is a huge part of the Splendor Solis. A lot of what's infused in it are the basis of color theories, the basis of matter theory. And I don't think it's an alchemist in the tub. I think you're using the human as a metaphor for matter, because humans are the matter in the physical world that we know have soul. So for the alchemist, the human, especially in an alembic, is a microcosm of this idea of how does God create? How does God let nature create? And how do you replicate that? I don't want to go on. I'll put in the link, an unabashed self-promotional link that I'm giving a talk on alchemy next week at Philosophical Research Society, that based on yours and my exhibition. So I'll stick that in. Thanks.
Could you
I'll
put
put the
that
link
in the chat
Yep.
or something so that we could get a link to it?
Yep.
Thank you.
There, I think that's it.
Yes, and that also at the end of the presentation, I will put out the information about your talk, David, next week at PRS.
Good.
You know, but I'm so glad that you came in today just on such short notice, and that your dog is still around has challenged the coyotes.
He's been listening intently the whole time, especially when you show peacocks. He likes chasing them in Hollywood forever.
I'd like to jump in here for just a moment and pick up the King Queen theme again and link that to astrology. As we know, in any astrology chart going back as far as there are astrology charts, both the sun and the moon appear. And we also know that historically, the more official, at least Western Occidental official point of view was that the twain meet in bed, but not psychologically otherwise, or something like that. What I think you're pointing out, Diane, is supported then actually by a more contemporary reading of astrology. That is, that every birth chart, every chart has both a sun and moon. And so the challenge really, which is also the alchemical challenge that you're pointing to, is not only to live one sun, but it is to live both the sun and the moon as a blend. They have to be taken together to make a full functional human being. The second point I would make is one of your wonderful footnotes in the book, where you reference a passage from John Beebe's Integrity in Depth. And John there is quoting Howard Teich, an unpublished manuscript, where Howard is talking about the sun-moon blend, or the masculine-feminine balance within each individual. Okay, and I think that's what you're pointing out here in this series, but also what is a huge contemporary challenge. Well, our colleague Robert Moore actually was working on that, decades ago. So thank you for bringing this and bringing me back to read the book again.
I also might mention that Howard Teich, as you mentioned, happens to be here. And, if he's willing, we could pop him into the screen. We have a spare slot out there.
And, Dana, it occurs to me, I'm not sure everybody recognizes that we'll be with Diane to continue this.
Yes, we will be with her next time and next month. And I would love to do a follow-up on this particular topic. I don't know whether I could push Diane into December, but, I think it's clear that the audience is out there for this material. And as I was talking with Boris at the very beginning of this, I think it is a testament to the community of myth and scholars as a whole that we can generate an audience like this about a 16th century manuscript. That's even difficult. I've never seen the initial one, the original one, and there are several different versions, but the Harley manuscript that's in the British Library, the closest I can get to it is Forg's book, this one. This thing is just, it's a work of art. They're beautiful, and they're about this size. This is pretty much the size of the illuminations. They're about 8 by
larger. That's larger than the originals.
They're a little larger. Yes, you're absolutely right. The originals are about 8 by 12, something like that, and that's slightly larger than that. But what interest? Doesn't it, with all of the media, the modernness, and the contemporary tech stuff that's going on in our world, that a bunch of us would spend an afternoon with you, Diane. So we should have another conversation, and maybe we don't have to wait so long about that. Hello, Howard.
This is one of the biggest honors of my life to spontaneously be here, because Joe Henderson was my first analyst. And I got the honor of seeing him for 5 years. And there's so many experiences, but the one I had called him up because I was really hurting and I was studying alchemy and Jung. And I got to the point where I saw he was the resident alchemist. So I called him up and said, "Can I study alchemy with you?" He said, "I don't teach it." So about 5 or 6 months later, I desperately called him up. "Can I go into therapy with you?" I had to beg him, but he saw me. And at that moment, I went to his office and told him a dream. He pulled the Splendor Solis out of his shelf and he points one of the plates. And at that moment, I knew it was an experience that you could not get intellectually. And to hear you, who I've admired from a distance, and to see Joe's picture and have Dana and Will, who are just amazing people in my life, who introduced me to Clay, who's one of the members of this community, has just changed my life. And to hear this come up spontaneously tonight, I cannot tell you what an honor it is to be recognized by this illustrious group. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Howard. And you have certainly brought your share of scholarship into it. But we have to thank Boris then for the synchronicity of you bringing you in the first place. Because to me, these synchronicities point out the validity of what we call the web of life.
Right on.
And you just can't really plan on these things happening. They happen. And if you're fortunate enough to recognize when they happen, you take advantage of them. So I'm looking and I saw you, I check out who's in here and I'm going, well, Howard, you're here.
Can I grab one more thing? So I had many of the best San Francisco analysts, including Joan Chodorow, which for those of you who know her, she is so magical. But my next major analyst was John Beebe. And here I'm in the middle of analysis with him. And John, I don't know, he's just in many years. And first of all, he introduces me to Rick Tarnas. All of a sudden, he says, he told Rick about the solar lunar male and that stuff. And so all of a sudden, I'm having dinner with he and Rick, and they're talking about astrology. What am I doing there? What am I really doing there? And then many years later, when I wrote my book, many years it took me with many editors, I wrote Rick and asked him, he put the most powerful comment I've ever heard said about the integrity of this material that you're all so deeply involved in. It feels like an ultimate honor to be with the alchemist of the alchemy tradition at the level of authenticity, and to spontaneously have this happen. That is, I'd like to say, the male triple masculine for men is one of the more important resources that is coming alive with some of us, I know in this group, but period. Let me just be quiet and thank you for the tremendous honor.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you very much. Gus, when we were talking earlier through emails, we talked about solar lunar when I saw your lunar article on your website, which I'd still like to read or see it. But in any event, who we haven't heard from Dennis. It's pretty fast moving today, Dennis. Can you keep up with us?
You guys are fast and loose, and I'm about 200 yards behind you. So I thank you, Dyane. Just listening to you helps so much. Myself and others like me who are really getting their feet wet in this alchemical tradition for the first time. So I'm watching the clock here, and I'll be brief, but what excited me when I saw the images is I asked myself, how do I approach these? And before I read your essay, Dyane, and other material, I thought, well, let's pay attention to the aesthetic encounter with each of these, not knowing so much of the mythology that was surrounding them. So let me tell you what I did. I asked myself, what is it that I'm gazing at
Mhm.
in each of the images? And what ways are they effectively informing me?
Yes.
So I set up a ritual. I get up at 4:30, 7 days a week, so I'm kind of familiar and love the moon as much as does Dana. And I decided set up a ritual. So every morning I lit a candle. I do that all the time, but especially for these images. I put on Gregorian chant music, and I just have one light on, and I started to look at the images. I also found that this small ritual action made me more porous and more open to
Mm.
each of these images, which I was treating as poems. And the poetics of these images is just magnificent.
Yes.
Having recently been involved intensely with Melville's Moby Dick
Oh,
and nature's
Yeah.
presence,
yeah.
as a colleague, Willow Young, who grew up on Nantucket Island, led afternoon sessions, and I was teaching Moby Dick in the morning. And then we took walks in nature on Nantucket Island. And so these walking meditations through nature were almost preparatory to tonight and to the images that you sent earlier. And so I asked myself, what interplay was being dramatized in each of these images between human nature, the natural order, and the divine natures, all of which Melville is interrogating beautifully in his epic, all of which were intermingling to form a new, and now I believe, a coherent world, even a coherent worldview. So after reading the descriptions under each of the first 8 images, then looking at the image, I stopped reading. I stopped reading the description
Mm-hmm.
and looked exclusively and tried to imagine my way into the image without being preformed or preset by the script. I began to follow the sun and moon images, beginning my gaze at the top and then descended. I thought to continue this way of entering each rich image from top to bottom. So each allowed me a descent to the Earth's surface. And I'm just going to read a couple more. I have 2.5 pages typed here of my, I'm going to call it my methodology, because
Wonderful.
I was free floating. And I thought, I've got to ground myself somewhere without literalizing too quickly, if at all, what the images were about. And so I'm just going to read a couple of other things. I tried to let the image unfold by gazing at it in its specificity. And I asked, what is the atmosphere of the painting or the setting? The action taking place, or has something already taken place and the residue of it is now the image?
Mm-hmm.
What is the story being depicted? And I'm also remembering your remark, some of these may not have a story. They may be an image, and they may be kind of autonomous. Did I see a connection between the intensity of the main plot when I felt there was a story and the social or communal setting of the plots that surrounded it? Within some sequences, like the flask that appears in 14 and following, is there a continuous story with each image a moment in the dramatic narrative? So I should be seeing them as something both particular and unifying in design. And then I went on and on. But what that did for me is it gave me a toehold without having the history that so many of you have in this field. And the experience was enriched each time I went through them, which I did 4 different times. And then tonight's comments from all of you have just amplified that even further. So that was my approach, to try to understand the aesthetic impact on me. So thank you.
That's fabulous, fabulous. And we also might also think of the idea of beauty, how important that these are so beautiful and that it's drawn us to these images. Yeah. David.
Thank you.
We've talked a lot about gender and we're talking about narrative, and we have 2 women on panelists. So if you don't mind, Sophie, I don't want to put you on the spot, but as a graphic artist who deals with visual narrative, I'd like to hear what you think about this stuff.
Well, thank you, David. And thank you, Dyane, for your presentation. I actually was drawn to what you talked about in the first plate where you shown the triple eagle, the white bird and the alembic, and sort of the conflicted scene going around. And I felt like this is the one plate where you talked about it and you felt the emotion of it. You were talking about how the bird was feeling. And in my own images, the ones that I associate with this particular plate is kind of relates to the difficulty of changing, so that there's like this forward movement and the opposite, the resistance to this movement. So there is really that moment in the transformation that where you're really conflicted with it. You don't want to change. And something also that just occurred to me was that part of this change, part of what was associated for me in those drawings was the concept of memory, because when you change, there's something that you don't want to let go of. And I think something particular about, if we're talking about humans versus nature, I mean, nature kind of cleans itself out, disappears. And I think it was you, David, you mentioned like the white bird was like the symbol of purification. And that is sort of like the fear of losing the memory. And it kind of resonates with what we're going, I think the conflict we're going through right now in this big change is like, what are we losing, from before? And I think that man's particularity is that we accumulate the history while nature kind of recycles, cleans, putrefies, and there's nothing left. It just changes. It doesn't remember what was in the past. It always moves forward. But it is us humans who want to hang on to things.
Actually, when you showed via universalis particularibus, etc. I mean, it's actually it particularius. It's plural. It's like particular things, individual things. And actually, the next exhibition I'm probably going to work on is art of memory, and this idea of like, how do you take fragmented flashes of the mind and interrelate them in some kind of narrative space to, create a narrative of history or a consigned thing. Well, history is sad. A voice becomes a memory fades into history or just oblivion. And how do you take the particularia and like weave, whether it's a myth or true, memory of history. I mean, and that's what art of memory always taught. But I'd like to approach it from more of a global, non-Western point of view, which we had tried with the alchemy exhibition. It ain't easy, It's everything.
That's right.
But that I'd love that you brought up memory.
Yeah, that seems like something we don't think about, but it's it's definitely related to men.
It's a huge thing in rare books on alchemy of the layout, the graphic layout of all these allegorical icons, symbols of how they're both sort of chemical formulas, but like Dyane was talking about, inner transformation, perfection of the soul, reaching the sublime. And they're very influenced by memory books. coming out of Islam and into the Renaissance. So I
Mhm.
love that's my favorite stuff.
I wonder if I could say something to Dennis. Dennis, when Joe Henderson and I finished writing the book, we taught a seminar for the advanced candidates at the Jung Institute, and I printed out a copy of one image a month and gave it to them and said, live with this, knowing nothing about it.
Yeah.
And come back next month. And I love what you did. These images are so rich, and the symbols have so many associations and interpretations. So tonight you just got one person's slice of something where I focused on certain things to bring out a point. But I do want to emphasize how incredibly sophisticated and fascinating these are, and how we're drawn into them because of their beauty. And David, thank you so much. I would love to learn a lot from you, because I'm not I want your job. I want to do what you do. I wish if I could grow up again and do something, I'd do what you do, because I love these manuscripts, and I only wish I knew Arabic. And I would love to could you possibly find for us an earlier Arabic language version of the Splendor Solis? I know it must be there somewhere.
I don't know about that, but I don't know about that, but it the Emerald Tablet is never written in Greek. It's in Arabic.
Yeah.
That comes out later. All of our alchemy collection is online. It's all digitized and online, and you won't learn it from me. You learn it from yeah. And you're right. I won't grow up, and you can't have my job. But it's it's the books that know. Not me. So, and all of it is there. It's great. Look at
the spirit from matter. The metaphor of getting it all online. It's all about freeing alchemy, all about, in some ways, transmuting and freeing the spirit from the matter, or bringing the matter into perfection of the spirit. And then how now these are these immaterial presentations of these texts. I'm struck by some comments here where people are really meditating on just the power of the image. This is some of the stuff you guys are saying as well. The power of the images, just their immediate poetic meaning. And I just want to recognize a couple of these comments from Craig and Susan, engaging that. And that's something that I'm especially into as well. I'm in a symbolism unit with all of my young storytellers, screenwriters, filmmakers, actors, dancers, right? And so I keep saying to him, don't get locked. I see a door is a door. Right? A shadow is a shadow, right? And so I think that's this consciousness, this modality of consciousness that, Eliade kind of argues comes before the spoken word, this kind of dreamlike consciousness, this image-driven consciousness. I don't need a word for snake before I've got a million associations that come up when I see a snake. It's already a living word, and it exists in my dream that way. So one of the things I just want to acknowledge and appreciate is how much you've helped us engage a modality of consciousness that is incredibly rich and valuable to all of us, and sometimes hard to penetrate and enter into in our modern world.
Thank you.
Oh, I was freezing.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
The one thing that occurs to me, and I don't know a better way to do it, but when I finish with the video that we'll make from here, and then it'll be a few days, I'll make a title frame that will have the links to the Getty and the Getty website that David has just put in the chat, as well as the various Splendor Solis websites where you can get these resources. Since this really is only going to be available through a video, you'll have to kind of pause your computer and write them down or copy them and paste them. unless somebody else has got a better way to do it. But I'm really struck by the quality of scholarship that we've brought into this particular Myth Salon, and Gus and Boris. I really thank you guys, for supporting Dyane, and David for being responsive to it, and Howard for just being spontaneous enough to say, wait a minute, I heard my name mentioned. This is really cool, and Sophie, as always. Sophie was one of my original choices to be a part of this thing. And I wanted to respect Dyane's desire to have a really smaller panel than we normally have. And I think it shows the nature of how things grow of their own accord. We got back to the normal 9. It's a different group of people, but I like the layout on the screen of 9 rather than 6. But be that as it may, look at what we added. Look at the quality of the people that we are surrounding ourselves with. And I think it really points to the fact that when you get the right group of people, and there's a lot of vociferous interchange, good stuff really comes out. And I just, again, Boris and Gus, I want to see more of you. I hope you'll come back and play with us. And I hope, Gus, when I talk to you about the solar lunar idea that I've worked with Howard on other projects, that we can get a Myth Salon on solar lunar, and do lunar masculine. We just came off of a full moon, which I respond to all of this stuff. This gets in my juices. I'm weird for the last week. And now that we've had the full moon, I'm okay. But I have learned to navigate around a context that if I had it to do, would I be predictable and silence that part of me? Probably not. It's just part of who I am. So I think this is a good place for us to bring it to a close at 7 o'clock and get everybody out of here on time. Will, do you have any last minutes thoughts that you'd like to share? And then.
Well, I'm afraid I might be skipping, so I don't want to walk right into that one. That's, of course, being at the studio's internet. But I just want to make sure everybody knows we're going to be back and continuing this conversation. There are like Dennis, who has pages of notes. There are tons of stuff I want to talk about. The stuff we talked about with Achilles, talk about the proto-Achilles, and there are a million things that I think all of us have to keep going in this conversation, more than we can fit in these 2. And hopefully y'all will go see David's talk at the Philosophical Research Society and just steep yourself in this stuff. But yeah, all I want to say is, come on back and let's keep at it.
Excellent. And I will be there to see David. I haven't been there since COVID. They've been quiet like most of us. And, we're just finding now that we can maybe with caution congregate with one another. On that note, let's go out in a little moment of silence. Go forward, be brave, be safe. I love you all. Wherefore, if you cannot speak, therefore be silent. Good night, everyone. Thank you all very much.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, Dyane.
Thank you, Dyane.
Thank you all. It was a rich evening.
Very
Good night. Thank you, Dyane.
That's the real goal.
Everybody.
Thank you for the honor of knowing you all.
Thanks, Howard. Bye, all.
Good night, Howard.
Good night, Dana.
Good to
Thank
see you.
Yep, talk to you soon. I'll be at that talk next week.
Good.
So glad to
Do
hear that.
that.
Yeah, what an interesting group. My
You
God.
got it.